Hello, team players. So, Howl of the Wild has been out for quite a while now, and you've probably at least had a chance to look at least some of the ancestries and archetypes in this book. However, what you might not have realized is that there are brand new spells in this book as well. So let's get right into those. Starting with Albatross Curse. This spell summons a spectral albatross that hovers around one creature within 30 feet. For the next minute, you and all allies within 30 feet of the target receive a +1 circumstance bonus to hit that target. The target can spend a single action to attack the spectral albatross, which automatically succeeds and kills it. However, doing so requires them to make a will saving throw. On a success, the target is stupefied 1 for 1 round. On a failure, the next time the target makes a will save within the next minute, they must roll twice and take the lower results. On a critical failure, the duration of this effect is 1 hour rather than 1 minute. This spell is actually really good because it's a circumstance bonus, which means it stacks with status bonuses. And this is available to occult casters. So imagine combining this with Courageous Anthem, because those two do stack, and you don't even have to sustain this. And that first effect, no saving throw whatsoever. And if they try to get rid of the spell by attacking the albatross, then they're going to take some kind of penalty as long as they don't critically succeed on their saving throw. I highly recommend this spell for any occult or primal caster. Next we've got Antlion Trap. You can target a 15-foot radius burst within 120 feet. That area becomes difficult terrain. In addition, any creature or unsecured object that enters the sand or starts its turn in the sand must make a reflex saving throw. They are moved toward the center of the sand depending on how they did on their saving throw. On success, they're moved 5 feet toward the center of the sand. On a failure, they're moved 10 feet toward the center of the sand. On a critical failure, they are also moved 10 feet toward the center of the sand, but they are also immobilized. They can attempt the escape action against your spell DC to get out of this, though. This is a fantastic difficult terrain spell. It is only available to primal casters, but it's fantastic. You're slowing them down with the difficult terrain, and if they don't get out of the pit on their first turn, they're probably going to get moved back, meaning it might take them multiple turns to get out of this. No matter how you slice it, you are getting them to waste at least 2 actions simply by casting this spell. It is a 3-action spell, so it is going to take your entire turn to cast this. However, should the target have a low reflex save, they're probably going to be stuck in this stuff for a while. And while they're stuck in there, you can be hitting them with ranged attacks. I highly recommend this spell too. With Camel Spit, you gain a spit attack that you can use once when you finish casting the spell, and for 1 action on each of your subsequent turns. However, after your 3rd spit attack, the spell ends. Your spit attack requires a ranged spell attack roll against a target within 15 feet. And it deals 1d6 acid damage and dazzles the target for 1 round on a hit. On a critical hit, the target takes double damage and 1 persistent acid damage. This one is okay. It's not great. It's one of those things where it's like, it's just damage. I mean, don't get me wrong, I would probably rather regular hit than critical hit with this spell, because at least Dazzled puts a flat check on everything they try to do, even if it is for just 1 round. Persistent acid damage is okay in my book. But overall, I consider this to just be a damaging spell, and it's not even that good of one, to be honest. I'm not a huge fan of this spell. With Claws of the Otter, you gain a +1 bonus to athletics checks to swim and a claw unarmed attack for 1 hour. The claws gained from this spell deal 1d4 slashing damage and 1d6 cold damage. I'll just say this. This spell is better than a lot of other damaging spells out there. The reason being is because the claws unarmed attack actually does 2 different types of damage. Meaning you can hit the weaknesses of more enemies with this than if you just had one type of damage. In addition, if an enemy is immune to one type of damage but not the other, at least you're doing some damage. However, this spell does not heighten well at all. You get it at 2nd rank, and then it doesn't heighten until 5th rank and then 8th rank. And all heightening it does is increase the cold damage. Again, I do think that this spell is better than a lot of damaging spells out there, but I'm still not a huge fan of this spell either. Next up we have Confusing Cry. You target a 20-foot emanation around you, and every creature in that area must make a will saving throw. However, they must be able to hear you in order for this spell to work. On a successful saving throw, the target is stunned 1. On a failure, the target is confused for 1 minute. However, it does get a new saving throw at the end of each of its turns to end the confusion. On a critical failure, the target also immediately attacks itself. However, this strike does not give that creature a flat check to end the confusion. This spell is really, really good. You do have to be careful with it though, because it can hit your allies. But if you're careful and you only use this when there are enemies around, then this spell can be fantastic. I mean, this inflicts stun 1 to multiple enemies on a successful saving throw, which is already huge. And this can turn an encounter that's really tough into the enemies attack each other situation, especially if the enemies are dumb like ogres. Unfortunately, this spell does have that dreaded incapacitation trait. But the fact that this inflicts the stun to 1 condition on a successful saving throw means the incapacitation trait doesn't matter near as much, because inflicting stun to 1 on multiple enemies is pretty darn amazing. And keep in mind, that's on a successful saving throw. Croak Voice is actually a pretty fantastic spell to use against other spellcasters. You target 1 creature within 30 feet who must make a Fortitude saving throw. On a successful saving throw, if the target attempts to use an action with the auditory trait or cast a spell that doesn't have the subtle trait, then they have to make a DC 5 flat check or the action is lost. Once per round, the target can spend an interact action rubbing its throat to make another Fortitude save against this spell. On a failure, using an action with the auditory trait also deals 2d10 mental damage to the target. On a critical failure, this damage is doubled, and the target can't spend an action to end the effect early. If you're going up against an enemy bard, this is an amazing spell to use on him. Flat out. Unfortunately, it is only available to arcane and primal casters. But this is still a fantastic option if the opponent has auditory effects at their disposal. But this spell is practically useless if they don't. Now we've got a decent out of combat spell with Foraging Friends. You call forth a small band of animals. Things like mice, birds, that sort of thing. Small animals. You send forth these animals to gather food for your party, and they return 1 hour later with enough food to feed 4 medium creatures for 1 day. These animals then return to their normal behavior. Your proficiency in spell attack rolls and DCs might need to be higher if you're in a particularly strange environment at the GM's discretion. If you're in a survival campaign, this spell can be absolutely amazing. But In most campaigns, you're not going to use this very much, as I don't think foraging for food really matters too much. At least not in my campaigns, anyway. I just kind of gloss over that. But if that's the type of campaign you're in, this spell is amazing. Otherwise, you're probably better off picking a different spell. Now we come to one of my favorite new spells with Frog Tongue. Not only is this spell hilarious, but it's also one of the best spells in the game for characters that want to transform. It is only available to primal casters. However, you target one creature within 30 feet and flick your tongue at them, dealing 2d8 bludgeoning damage with a basic reflex save. On a failed save, the creature is now stuck to the end of your tongue. It is off guard and cannot move further than 30 feet away from you. They can escape by dealing 10 slashing damage to your tongue or by escaping against your spell DC. Severing the tongue with slashing damage does not damage you but ends the spell. If you move outside 30 feet from the target, the spell ends. This pretty much says you are now tethered to me. Keep in mind, what you can do is you can use this spell on them, and then on your next action, on your next turn, you can transform into something like a bear. And now guess what? They are tethered to a bear, or whatever you decide to transform into. Because the spell doesn't end. You don't even have to sustain it. And remember, they are also off guard as long as they're affected by this spell. Which means everyone has a better chance of hitting them. This spell is fantastic and hilarious. I definitely recommend you at least consider this spell. Alright, with Hidebound, as a reaction, if a creature within 60 feet of you would take physical damage from a strike, you can give that creature resistance 5 to all physical damage except adamantine until the beginning of their next turn. I mean, obviously there are better resistance spells out there, especially at higher levels, but this is a second level spell and it is a reaction, which means primal casters that don't have many reactions, like witches and druids, will love this spell, especially since you can cast it on anyone. It says a creature within 60 feet. It means any of your allies or yourself. It is only for one round, but for a second level spell, that's not bad at all. And then we come to Hippocampus Retreat. In order to use this spell, you must be mostly or totally submerged in water. You make a melee spell attack roll against one creature within 10 feet, dealing 2d6 bludgeoning damage. You can then swim 30 feet. If you already have a swim speed, you can use that plus a 10-foot circumstance bonus. You also gain a +2 circumstance bonus to AC against reactions triggered by this movement. This spell is really good for getting away from enemies that you don't want to be near. However, the fact that you have to be mostly or totally submerged in water to even use this spell makes this not a great spell for me. I mean, how often are you going to be in that situation? I just don't see it. I don't recommend this one. It's just too restrictive. With Luring Wail, you target a 60-foot emanation around you. All creatures in that area that can hear you must make a will saving throw. If you say the target's name as part of casting this spell, they take a -2 penalty on their saving throw. Each creature that enters the area while you sustain this spell must make a saving throw. On a success, the target is slowed 1 for 1 round. On a failure, the creature is fascinated and compelled to move towards you. As long as it is in the emanation and can hear, it must spend at least 1 action on its turn moving towards you. On a critical failure, the target must spend all of its actions moving towards you and is also off guard. This spell isn't good for a number of reasons. First of all, it's a 60-foot emanation, which is a huge area, but it affects every creature in the area, not just enemies. Therefore, allies can't be close to you while you're casting this spell. Number 2, while the success effect is amazing, the failure and critical failure effects aren't great. Because the spell pretty much ends if they get attacked. It is decent for spellcasters that want to be attacked in melee. However, most spellcasters are not going to want to use this spell because it forces enemies to move towards you, which is not a good thing for a ton of spellcasters. In addition, it has that dreaded incapacitation trait, which means it won't work well on bosses. If you can actually pull this spell off, it's pretty amazing if you're transformed. But that's a big if. With Primal Chorus, for 3 actions, you can target a 1-mile burst, and the spell lasts until your next daily preparations. You Howl. Doing so gives you a rough idea of how many creatures with the animal or beast trait are in the area. But significant creatures can make a will save to resist your call. You gain a +1 circumstance bonus to initiative rolls in an encounter with any creature that responded to your call. For the purposes of using the Coerce action while in exploration mode, you count as being able to talk to those animals and beasts. However, you can only issue simple commands such as to approach or hide, and you can only understand simple ideas such as the presence of natural hazards or compliance with the order. This is definitely something you cast out of combat, and, well, it's not that great of a spell, to be honest with you. I mean, getting a +1 to initiative against animals or beasts is pretty good, but that's the only real good thing about this spell. Because, number one, when you cast this spell, you have no idea whether there are even animals or beasts in this area unless they are right in front of you. So, that means that this spell is pretty situational. But coercing animals is okay. But, I mean, you can definitely take this, but it really depends on your campaign and your GM whether this is any good or not. Next, we've got Sacred Beasts. You must worship a deity in order to use this spell. Target a 5-foot burst within 30 feet. You summon an animal that is sacred to your deity, or a swarm of them if it's tiny. For example, you summon a lion if your deity is Iomedae, or you summon a swarm of spiders if your deity is Norgaberger. If your deity does not have a sacred animal, then choose a thematic one with your GM. The animal or swarm assaults all creatures in the area, dealing 2d6 damage. This damage is bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing, depending on what you summoned. This requires a basic reflex save. When the spell is over, the animal returns to your deity's plane. This spell is okay. It does good damage and it heightens well. But because you are summoning an animal specific to your deity, you don't get to change what animal you summon with this spell, and therefore you do not get to change what type of damage it deals. This would be a lot better if you could choose what type of damage the spell actually deals. I don't really like this spell very much. Next up is an amazing spell called Snake Fangs. For 1 minute, you gain a Fangs unarmed attack. It has the finesse, grapple, and unarmed traits. This Fangs attack deals 1d8 piercing damage and 2d10 poison damage. In addition, if you have a creature that is at least one size smaller than you grabbed with your fangs, you can use the Swallow Whole ability. This deals 4d6 bludgeoning damage and has a rupture value of 17. A swallowed creature is transported to an extra-dimensional space that resembles a snake's stomach. So if they escape, they appear in a space adjacent to you. If you are killed or the spell ends, the creature is immediately freed. Basically what this spell does is you can grab people with your fangs, do good damage, and you can swallow them whole, which effectively means they need to spend multiple actions getting out of the snake's stomach. Which means you can take an enemy completely out of the fight for up to 1 minute. This spell is insane. I mean, granted, it's only good for melee spellcasters and is only on the primal list, which means this is great for Untamed Order druids. I highly recommend this spell. Next, we've got 2 incarnate spells to talk about. The first is Summon Stampede. You summon a Stampede within 120 feet. The Stampede has the size of a gargantuan creature and has a speed of 60 feet. Upon arrival, every creature in a 60-foot emanation must make a will saving throw. On a success, the target is frightened 1. On a failure, the target is frightened 2. On a critical failure, the target is frightened 3 and fleeing for 1 round. On departure, the Stampede moves up to double its speed. It tramples all large or smaller creatures in the area, as well as hazards and structures, dealing 8d8 bludgeoning damage with a basic reflex save. The Stampede ignores and attempts to counteract any natural difficult terrain it moves through. This is a fantastic spell to use at the beginning of combat, especially if the enemy is far away from you. Because when it arrives, it frightens foes, which means that any attacks you make on subsequent turns are going to be at a lower AC, and they're also going to lower everything else that the creature tries to do. And then it tramples all enemies. Also attempts to get rid of any natural difficult terrain, which means you don't have to worry about that coming in. However, you do have to be careful with this spell because it is a 60-foot emanation on arrival. And it's all creatures, not just enemies. Which means your allies can be affected by this. This is a good spell, but unfortunately a lot of you probably won't get high enough to ever cast it, as it is a 7th rank spell. But if you do get high enough to cast this spell, I do recommend it, but you gotta be careful with it because that arrival effect can hit your allies. And the last spell I have to talk about in this video is Summon Warden of the Wilds. Now, this is a rare spell and it is very long, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here. But you summon a Warden of the Wilds. Which one you summon depends on your environment. For example, you'd summon the Warden of Caverns and Burrows if you're in an underground environment, or the Warden of Forests and Meadows if you're in a forested environment. The Warden of Caverns and Burrows traps enemies upon arrival and causes difficult terrain on departure. The Warden of Forests and Meadows deals mental damage to creatures that try to move within 40 feet of it, and casts Blur and True Sight on you and all your allies on departure, but these effects only last 3 rounds. The Warden of Oceans and Rivers pulls creatures towards it on arrival, and on departure it casts Feet to Fins and Water Breathing on you and all allies, but again the duration is reduced to 3 rounds. The Warden of Peaks and Skies deals sonic damage to all creatures within 20 feet and sickens creatures that critically fail on their saving throw, and upon departure affects you and your allies with fly and unfettered movement. But again, the duration is reduced to 3 rounds. These are all really good for the environment that you summon them in, but the ones I recommend are definitely the first 2, as they both have really good effects on enemies. The other 2 are pretty situational, depending on what type of environment you're in. You may not ever summon those. But, and especially that Wardens of Oceans and Rivers, as you pretty much need to be in water for that to be even useful. But, as I said, this is a rare spell, which means you definitely need your GM's permission to even take this spell. So, that's all the spells we got in Howl of the Wilds. And I gotta say, most of these are really good. Some of them are just damage, and some are incredibly situational. But overall, I think this definitely adds something to the game, for sure. But if you guys enjoyed this video, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe and do all that other YouTube stuff. And if you're interested in getting my videos early, you can become a member of this channel or join me on my Patreon page. All the links, plus a link to my Discord, is in the description below. But if you guys want to see more Howl of the Wild content, I recommend you check out these videos here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and remember, teamwork is vital. It helps us solve problems.